Today, we're going to talk about planning your wedding in a blank space or your backyard. You don't have to get married just in a hotel or in a ballroom, and all those sorts of things are somewhat traditional. You can really do a lot of different things. So blank spaces and backyards are becoming super, super popular. Obviously, there's a lot to consider there. For instance, I remember your dad wanted us to get married in the backyard.
Yeah, he did.
His city girl was going to get married in a backyard.
Yeah, that didn't work. That didn't quite go that way.
Yeah, it was close, though.
It was close. It was almost a toss-up. Sorry, Dad.
Yeah, it felt like maybe no.
Yeah, no. That wasn't for his city girl.
Is it because you were overwhelmed by the blank space?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
In the yard?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of work, man. And my dad's a good gardener. He could have made it really beautiful, actually.
He is.
But, I wouldn't have wanted to help with that.
No.
So it would have just been, oh, Dad, yeah, can you plant this tree? And
yeah.
He would have done it.
He would have done it, for sure.
He definitely would have done it.
I don't think he was thinking through all the 200 people going through his house, though.
Yeah, or his garden.
More
importantly than his house.
Right, right. I don't think he thought that through.
No.
So we did not elect to go that way.
No, we did not. We went straight for that city wedding.
We did.
But thanks, Dad. For offering.
Yeah, no, that's really nice. I wonder if he's even listening.
Probably not.
Does he even know that this exists?
Yeah.
He does?
Yeah. Hey, Dad.
But he doesn't have an iPhone.
Well, there's that.
Right. I think he has a Nokia blue phone, right?
Something like that.
Just kidding, Craig. I love
you. All right, let's talk about blank spaces.
All right. Yes, let's not go down the Nokia route. Those were good phones.
They were.
Yeah, Snake, remember that?
No.
You don't remember Snake?
No.
Let's talk about. Are you trying to keep me on task?
Let's talk about these blank spaces.
All right. Okay. Well, I thought this was a blank space podcast, and we could just fill in with whatever we wanted to talk about. Is that inaccurate?
This is back to you, just not chaos. Having a plan and chaos.
Go back to the timeline podcast.
That's right.
And listen there, and then you'll have a little more context to the fact that it's just bananas with me.
That's right. Yeah. All right, bananas. Let's go.
All right. All right, so there's a lot of things that you have to consider as you're you're thinking about having a blank space as your wedding venue.
Yeah, a lot more than that traditional venue that you were talking about, because you need to bring so much stuff in.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's literally, in some cases, not even bathrooms.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just down in Charleston for an event, and it's called the Woodlands. It's under a tent on the lake, and there's nothing there. It's unbelievably beautiful, and you have to have the right team to do it. But if you can, it's incredible. But there's so much. That was the thing that struck me, is that the logistics of that. Like, you have to have bathrooms, you have to have electricity. Like, there's so many things to consider.
Yeah, so many logistics. But it can be a really cool way to give you exactly what you want.
Yeah.
If you can't find exactly what you want in your local venue or local market.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Anyways,
so
first thing that we'll focus on is actually the equipment, which I sort of alluded to there. So since you're starting bare bones, what do you need to kind of fill the space? Like, how are you approaching this?
Well, like you said, you literally need everything, which sometimes people don't even necessarily think about,
right.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that this blank space or backyard wedding is going to be less expensive, because you have to bring in so many things. So, I mean, even the basics, like we're talking tables. Those aren't going to be there. Chairs. If you're getting married on a grassy area, you're going to need to bring in a dance floor, or possibly flooring that has to go down to make it even.
Right.
You may have to, replant sod, or even out your backyard so that it doesn't have, dips in it that people are tripping over.
Yeah.
You're going to need a bar.
Obviously.
Right.
That's the first thing to order.
That's the first thing to think about.
Absolutely.
And whether that's just tables with a linen, or,
what kind of bar are we talking about? Like the full boat, right?
Yeah, it could be anything.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the cool thing about a blank space. You might have a venue that has like a built-in bar that's beautiful, but maybe you don't love it. So this way you can really bring in like any type of bar. So literally like all of those just kind of basic things that you find in a traditional venue have to come in when you're working with a blank space.
Sure. And then, I mean, at the end of the day, you don't want your wedding to turn into Fire Festival. That would be bad. That, you don't want to sell everybody this beautiful wedding and then you come out and it's just a free for all.
Yeah. And you got to think about like some of those like small things too. And I know we're going to talk on some of this, but like even some of the things like, maybe you're in your backyard and it's the summer, like, are there a ton of mosquitoes? Do you need to think about like spraying for mosquitoes and having off spray, or maybe it's going to get colder and be, chilly and you might need to give people shawls or something to keep warm. Or maybe all of your friends are going to wear heels and it's all grass. So maybe you need to provide flip-flops or those little heel stoppers. So like things like that you have to think through. Like you really have to kind of think through your guest experience in addition to kind of the basics that you're bringing in.
Yeah. No, it sounds like
I'm probably jumping ahead on you, but
you probably are, but that's okay. So what other unusual rentals, would you need besides obviously the tables and chairs?
Yeah. So
and the bar.
So like logistically, like you were saying, there's not going to be things that exist in a traditional venue. So that's going to be things like bathrooms. You're going to have to bring bathrooms in.
There's some cool ones out there, though.
There's some really cool ones. I mean, very, very fancy bathrooms on wheels.
Fancier than our bathroom.
Yeah. Fancier than, So, I mean, definitely like that's something you have to think about. If you're doing a backyard or like an outside blank space, you need to think about a tent. You can not rely on the fact that it's going to be the most perfect day ever. I'm
pretty sure it's going to be.
Even if it doesn't rain, like we're talking like if people are going to be outside for hours, it's going to be hot under the sun. They're going to be, getting sunburned. So that's gonna be another weird thing you have to think about is like sunscreen.
Yeah.
So you want to think about that in addition to your guests. You need to think about like your vendor team. So like there's no kitchen for your caterer to cook from. So they're going to have to bring that in. So what does that mean? You're probably going to need a tent for them. You're going to need tables. You're going to need equipment. That's something you're going to want to work with a bustld vetted caterer who has experience working in non-traditional venues that don't have like a regular kitchen.
Right.
I mean, there's not even like a refrigerator or an ice machine.
Right.
So you're going to have to think about like all of that has to come in. You have to bring enough ice for keeping everything cool, for your drinks, for keeping your bar cool. So those are things that you really, need to think about as well. And then lighting. So if you're in your backyard, you probably, and you have a big enough backyard to support 150 person guest count, you probably don't have a ton of lighting out there.
I'm pretty sure you could just run like a long extension cord. I'm sure you won't blow a fuse at all. No.
So lighting, and that's going to be lighting from where guests are parking, or if you have a valet or something, you're going to need lighting from that location to the ceremony location if it's going to be getting dark, to your reception location, to your bathrooms.
Right.
Your caterers are going to need lights. So you're going to really need under the tent. You're going to need to think about like all the places that you're going to need to bring in lighting as well.
Yeah. So what other sort of, to that point, what other electrical needs are there besides just lighting?
Yeah. So obviously, your lighting has to plug into something. So you're going to need generators, most likely, if you're going to be in a backyard.
Are those loud?
They can be, yeah. So you're going to have to make sure that they are far enough away from your guests, which means you're going to need, extra power cords and things like that. Now, if you're in a more traditional blank space than a backyard, some of these things may not apply. They might have bathrooms or lighting.
Right.
But especially if you're in a backyard or under a tent or like a venue you were just talking about, you're going to need generators to power all of this.
Yeah.
And in addition to the lighting, you're going to have to power your DJ or your band. If you have uplights or photo booth that needs power, and then your caterer again is going to need power. And then thinking through too, like, does your photographer need a place to plug in, throughout the night? Is there any power needs for any of your other vendors as well?
Right.
You're going to want to talk with them and make sure you get enough power from a generator, that you're not blowing fuses or
and if we're talking,
running out of power.
And if we're talking July in the South, I mean, we're under our tent, we're probably going to want like those Arctic blast giant things that they put like on the sidelines of football games.
Right, exactly.
Like it's just blowing cold air.
Exactly,
Yeah.
or fans or
I'm sure
something.
that takes up a lot of electricity.
Something to keep your people cool.
So kind of segueing then from there, what sort of things should you prepare for should in the off chance there's inclement weather?
Yeah. So like we mentioned, I mean, you really want to have a tent if you're planning a backyard wedding. If you're like, hey, I don't necessarily know if I want to get, have my reception under a tent or get married under a tent, you're still going to want to put a backup tent on reserve because you have no backup option other than a tent. So if it does rain, you need to think through that.
I mean, and tents can look really, really beautiful.
Oh my
too.
gosh,
Like it's
so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so beautiful. Now that's an investment too. Drapery and lighting under a chandelier.
Yeah.
It's not cheap.
Yeah.
Or, if you have a backup indoor space, maybe you have a huge house that is attached and can support your guest count, or maybe you're at a more, traditional blank space in the sense of like, maybe you're at like a museum or something that has an indoor option. But you want to make sure you think about that before you commit to your venue selection, and make sure you account for that in your budget.
Okay. Perfect. So then kind of segueing then from there, when you're thinking about the floor plan and the actual setup of this, once you've got it, like, I guess, what should you consider with your setup and your floor plan?
You're going to want to make sure that you accurately measure. So especially if it's a backyard situation, you want to make sure that you know how big your backyard accurately is. And you want to put in all that information into some kind of system that you're going to use, so that you can really get a good idea of how it's going to lay out.
One that you recommend? Off the top?
No, I mean, there's a lot of great systems out there.
Okay.
I think it depends on like your level of designability, probably.
Gotcha. So mine would be a loose leaf piece of paper.
Yeah. I mean, even graph paper could actually work,
Yeah, that makes sense.
as long as it's like accurate. And then you're going to want to make sure that, using either a planner or a rental company or a caterer or whoever you're using as your kind of resource, can help you to actually like put that together. And you're going to want to make sure you think about everything. So again, you're having to bring in bathrooms and dance floor and catering kitchen and all of these things, generators.
Yeah. You're
going to want to account for all of that on your floor plan and make sure that it's like laid out, and thought through.
Okay. No, it makes sense. So how so how do you put it all together?
That's a great question. I mean, the first and foremost thing to think about is like your big items. So like, where's your tent going to go? Where are your bathrooms? Where's your catering kitchen? Making sure that everything's close enough, so that people aren't, trekking to the bathrooms, or catering kitchens not having to run back and forth for, feet, like a long distance.
Yeah.
And now food service is slowing down. So thinking about those things and really paying attention that you're creating a floor plan that's good for your layout and for your logistics.
Yeah.
And then filling in from there. So putting the dance floor next to the bar, next to the DJ, filling in your guest seats, making sure your cake table is, out of the sun, so your buttercream cake isn't melting outside. Those are things that you're going to want to think about.
Yeah, makes sense. So who's in charge of the setup, and like how long does that take? Is it hours, days? Like what does that typically look like?
So if you're doing a blank space like this, I would strongly advise that you have a planner. Throughout the planning process,
Yeah.
you're really going to need a full service planner to help with this. And you can find amazing full service planners who've been vetted on bustld, because shameless plug. But so they're typically going to be kind of overseeing the setup. Then your rental company is going to obviously be in charge of setting up and breaking down of the tent and those rental items that you brought in. It's going to kind of depend on who's bringing those things in. Catering is going to be responsible generally for bringing in, any of the food items they need, plates, flatware, if they're bringing the napkins, those kinds of things as far as setup goes. I would just make sure that you account for the amount of time that everything takes. Tents take a long time to go up. They take a long time to come back down. They take a lot of manpower.
Yeah.
So if you're, planning on having this in your backyard, tent setup could begin, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday before the wedding. So that's something to keep in mind. That
And are
this
those
is gonna
venues
be,
typically okay with that?
if you're at a blank space venue, then that's going to be different, right?
Right.
If you're bringing in a tent to a blank space, then, you know, it might have to happen on Friday, or it might have to happen the day of the wedding on Saturday if you're having a traditional Saturday wedding. One thing to keep in mind is if you have a shorter timetable to set up, or if it's going to be on the weekends, you're typically paying a premium for that service.
Sure.
So it's going to cost you more.
Okay.
So if you're at a space where they're like, if we don't have a wedding on Friday, you can set up on Friday, but if we do, you have to set up on Saturday, then I would recommend that you get a quote for Saturday setup. And then you're happily surprised if you get Friday set up, but at least you're not, you know, sad when you find out the week of that you now have to pay, you know, a couple $100 or $1,000 extra to have a Saturday set up.
Right. Yeah, true. And then if you do, I mean, you could look at the option of hiring labor and things like that, but at the same time, you're spending more money.
Yeah, I mean, the rental company will bring in more labor,
Yeah.
but it's going to cost you more.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so then as far as like access is concerned, especially like a local residence, like how do you handle parking? I mean, that's true of anything, really.
It is.
But especially like local residents. I mean, because if you have 150 people come into your neighborhood, I mean,
Yeah.
there can only be 150 houses. So
Right. And you have to imagine, right? Like if you take your guest list and divide it by 2, that's how many people are going to be driving in.
oh, that's fair.
You know,
Yeah.
maybe it's just a rough estimate, but
Sure.
you're 150 people. I mean, we're talking about 75 cars.
It's a lot of cars.
That's a lot of cars to park. I mean,
Yeah.
even if you live in a ginormous neighborhood, people are
Yeah.
going to be walking for miles in heels and nice dresses. And that's
Right.
not the experience you want to create for your guests.
Right.
So the first thing to kind of think about is there a way to offer a valet? You know, can we set up a valet, and then where do those cars go? So whether maybe you live in a big neighborhood and there's plenty of parking for these cars. It's just that it's, you know, going to be a mile away.
Right.
So then, you know, you can kind of reserve those spots, talk to your HOA or your neighborhood or whatever you need to kind of get approval on, and then talk to a valet service. Are they going to need a car for the valet to kind of like shuttle them back and forth because it's so far and everyone's coming at the same time, right?
Right.
It's not like when you go out to dinner and everyone's kind of just arriving. Like
Right.
we're talking about like prime time here. Everyone's arriving at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another option can be, you know, everyone parks maybe at a nearby church or a nearby school that's going to be shut on a Saturday. Maybe you get permission for that, a bank, and then shuttle everybody from there. So that could be a good option as well. You know, make sure you talk to your neighbors, find out, and maybe all your neighbors are invited and they're like, yeah, everybody.
Well, that'd be awkward.
Yeah. Either way, you should talk to your neighbors. just let them know the party's going on. Yeah.
You're not invited, but
right.
you can still send a gift.
Exactly. So either way, you need to talk to your neighbors, and probably invite them, or at least give them a nice gift, because you're probably going to be loud if it's in your neighborhood.
Sure.
But you want to talk to them and find out, you know, can we have a couple of our guests park in, you know, your driveway, especially like people who maybe older guests or people who can't walk as far, you know, maybe that's VIP parking for them. So different things like that are options that you could explore.
Sure. And you could sell that too. VIP parking,
You would say that.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
Yeah. All access pass.
Exactly.
You get 5-minute meet and greet with the couple.
You would say that.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I mean,
It's-
you got to give the people what the people want.
That's right.
Yeah. So what about, to take it back to reality, what about vendor trucks and loading and unloading? And I mean, that can, even at a traditional venue, that can be painful. So
Yeah, I mean, no matter what venue you're at, it's something you have to think about.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of wants to arrive at the same time, especially it's, you know, if there's lots of parking and access and, you know, you're not in the city or at a house, it's easier. But where you're running into this issue is if you have limited parking or limited access to a parking deck or limited access to a loading dock or things like that. So you want to make sure that you schedule out your vendor arrivals to not have everybody arriving at the same time and give everyone fair access to the loading area. This is especially true in a backyard because you're not going to have as much space. So you're going to want to make sure that you're having people arrive at different times, unloading, and you're giving them plenty of time to move their trucks and things like that to wherever they need to go. So that's
Right.
another thing you need to think about. Where are all these trucks and things like that going to park?
Right.
So you're going to want to think about them as well in the parking situation.
yeah, I think that's something that I mean, I know I wouldn't think about that. I mean,
Right.
yeah. So, and then we've already touched on this a little bit, but as far as like restrooms and vendor storage and things like that, like where, you know, your heating trays and your ice and your restrooms, like all those things, like where does that go?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to want to think about maybe having like a small additional tent space for your vendors beside your caterers as well, so they can put their gear in there. You can put a table in there for them to eat.
Right.
Unless you want them eating with your guests, they're going to need a place to sit down too and, you know, eat their dinner after being with you for 8-10 hours of the day, probably more if it's a backyard wedding.
Right.
You know, you're
I
planning.
wasn't trying to trigger you.
No. But you just, you know, you want to think about that. And then like for your catering tent, like you might want to think about putting sides on that tent so that you don't see the caterers, you know, working on those heating trays and things like that. And lighting as well in there. You're going to want to think about that because if you're having dinner and it's getting dark, you want to make sure your caterer has enough, you know, light to be able to see what they're cooking, or after the cake is cut, you know, making sure that they can cut the cake and see it. So those are things that, and then, you know, clean up as well.
Sure. Yeah.
So you got to think about that throughout the whole night.
Yeah.
Another thing to think about that I didn't really touch on is sound ordinance. If you're going to be outside and you're going to be either in a neighborhood or, you know, even if it's in the city, your city or specific neighborhood might have sound ordinance. So that's something to look into if you need to have, you know, security, or you need to alert the police that you're having this big party so that, you know, they know, okay, if anything comes in, this is going on.
Yeah.
So those are other things you kind of have to think through as well.
And I know I've said this before, but I loved it when you and my boy Brandon did the silent disco at that one wedding. That was the one. It was so cool, but it was also really funny. Like when, like as a vendor, like running around, like and just seeing all these people dancing and singing, and it's like, but there's no music.
But there's no music. Yeah, it's a really good workaround if there is a sound ordinance.
Yeah. Anyways, so how, as always, you know, as couples are exploring using a blank space, whether they've considered it or they've already chosen one, and now they're like, oh, geez, what do I do now?
Yeah.
What next best steps would you suggest for our couples?
I would suggest you start early. There's a lot of additional steps using a non-traditional venue, whether that be all the things of a backyard wedding or even just a, you know, blank space like a museum. There can be additional steps that you have to think through, and like you really want to give yourself time to come up with your design. And I would suggest that you work with vendors who have experience working in these non-traditional type venues and can give you guidance. Obviously, we have a ton of vetted options over at bustld, so go check those out. But you know, use your vendor team, ask for advice. Don't think that you have to know everything because they've done this before.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is what they're the professionals in. So,
yeah.
Cool.